And that allows these fees to come in to that agency, into the department, to, as they projected that they will, their current funding based on their current fees is insufficient to, I think, 3 years out, they're running shy. So that's what this does.
Okay, and what's the appropriation?
The impact, Mr. Chairman, is there's not an appropriation. It's just money coming in.
Okay, any public comment? Seeing any public comment? Close public comment. Is there a motion on the re-referral? Moved by Representative Henderson, seconded by Representative Sherwood. Any amendments? Seeing none, roll call.
Representative Henderson. Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood. Representative Stiff. Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representative Swanitzer.
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye. Okay, next let's still go to the speaker's bill, House Bill 124, electrical generation taxation. Please come on up. You can, or you can stay there. That's fine.
Mr. Chairman, will this work?
Yep.
So, Mr. Chairman, fellow committee members, I bring you House Bill 124 and ask for your favorable consideration. So this is a bit of an old friend. It's been around a little while. And basically what this bill does is, in a nutshell, it just adds solar into the current tax for wind. So it would create a solar tax that would equal the wind tax, and you can see on page 2, it just simply goes in and goes like lines 2, 4, 8, basically just goes wind and solar, wind and solar. And there's been one question come up about, whether it would include like rooftop solar. And so if you look on into the statutes on the wind in 39-22-105, which is the exemptions, no tax shall be imposed upon electricity which is produced from any generating facility owned or operated by the federal government, state of Wyoming, or by any county or municipality in this state. No tax shall be imposed upon electricity which is produced for the personal consumption of the producer, including any excess production of electricity that does not exceed 500 kilowatts per hour in a 24-hour period. And I did a little Googling, and really, I think a rooftop solar, even a 1,700 square foot roof, you may be looking at 155 kilowatts per day. So it's well under that 500. Obviously, if you had a small solar farm that you were trying to sell generation back to the company, then that could get captured. My whole idea here is that if we're going to tax wind, then solar ought to likewise be taxed at a similar rate. I don't see the difference in the two. And that's basically the reason I've brought this bill the number of times that I have.
Okay. Questions for the bringer? Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, is this a tax that's in other states that you know of?
Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, I haven't looked this go around, but the last time I ran this bill, there was a state or two that taxed it, but it was taxed in a much different way. We would be, I think, more unique than the other states. The other states have done it a little differently, and I'd have to go back and look at that. But.
Public comment. Any public comment? Please come on up. One of them has a little buzzer on the seat.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is Kara Choquette. I work for two companies, Power Company of Wyoming, LLC, and Transwest Express, LLC. We're developing and constructing a very large wind project south of Rollins, as well as a new transmission line to connect Wyoming to new markets it is not serving today. And we're also exploring adding solar as part of the portfolio of energy resources we could develop at this site. So we oppose the bill for those reasons, but I also wanted to share some as you have in your handout, some background on the overall regional electricity markets to kind of set the stage for where Wyoming is at. The first slide, I think, is really important to share. This is about Wyoming's electricity supply since 1990. The U.S. Energy Information Administration has
So does-
electricity.
Do you have a copy of the handout? Can we get one for the? Yep. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries.
Go ahead.
I love this stuff, so I could talk all day long. I'm trying to be quick. The U.S. Energy Information Administration has data on Wyoming electricity generation since 1990. And I want to be clear, we're talking just here about electricity, not the fuels for electricity, just the electricity market for Wyoming. And you look at the EIA data, and the amount of electricity supplied from Wyoming has grown just 8% since 1990. In the meantime, our megawatt hours of export has declined. Part of that decline is because wind and solar and geothermal and other states have had the opportunity to build power plants in other states. Wyoming did maintain its energy export percentage of 58% for the last 2 years. And I would point to the electricity supply going from 42 million megawatt hours to 43 million megawatt hours. Part of that was due to new wind, including new wholesale wind, which I'll talk about in a minute, that added about 1,500 or 1.5 million megawatts of electricity to Wyoming energy supply in recent years. The next slide is just to show you a little bit what's happening in the Western states relative to electricity generation. You can see in general, power that's owned and provided by electric utilities is a pretty stable market, or if you're in economic development world, you would say it's pretty flat. There's some outliers here, and that's because EIA considers federal hydropower as part of what they consider as electric utility generation. So Washington and Arizona, because of the large amounts of hydropower, are pretty variable, but you can see in general, the amount of electric generation is fairly flat, and Wyoming is just slightly below that average. And then the next slide is the one that I think is really key for Wyoming to consider. The growing area of the market is wholesale power generation, like what we're aiming to do with our wind farm and potentially a solar project as well. This is the growing area of the market in the West. And in this market, which is generally, there are some in other states, natural gas generators that are IPP generators. In general, however, this is a market that is served by wind and solar. And in this market, and I put the, there's 11 Western states. I didn't even put California on the chart because it's so far off the chart. It would distort all the rest of the data. I also looked at what is the amount of wholesale power generation coming from North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. Wyoming is last of all of these states in the amount of wholesale power generation that it supplies. I think Wyoming, as the great and awesome energy state that it is, shouldn't be last in any category of any part of the energy sector. And this is an area that we can help grow through more independent power plants, which typically do use wind and solar. For example, there's a solar plant right on the Utah and Wyoming county line. You look at the EIA website, the solar resource is exactly the same on both sides. It has access to the exact same utility transmission network, but that plant, those investments were made on the Utah side.
Because?
We don't know, but I can say that you can tell through publicly available information, the solar resource is exactly the same. The transmission network is exactly the same, and they're selling to a provider that does business in both Utah and Wyoming.
But it's untaxed here, period.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
So that tells me that it was not an economic reason. It was socioeconomic and of where they put it.
I think I'm answering your question right, that solar power plants like wind power plants pay very large property taxes and sales and use taxes. And then of course for wind, there is the $1 per megawatt hour generation tax. I don't know about the solar if they have, but I think other people in the audience can speak to that.
Yeah, and there may be substantial Utah credits, I'm presuming. Tax credits.
True. And there's also examples of solar plants being built just outside of our borders in Colorado and South Dakota and Montana.
Go ahead.
Well, Kara, help me on your first slide when it says megawatt supply from Wyoming grew by 8%. So that's capacity.
Yeah, if you look, Mr. Chairman,
That's
you-
capacity, correct?
Yeah, if you look at the
And
first,
then on exported, that's produced. Is that, I just want to make sure I'm seeing that right, because capacity and what's produced could possibly suggest that capacity isn't always delivering.
Mr. Chairman, this is the actual amount of electricity that Wyoming is producing in the first column. So in 1990, for example, Wyoming was producing roughly 40 million megawatt hours and exporting about 26.7 million megawatt hours.
Well, but I want to come down to that second bullet in that sentence. That's the one I'm trying to understand. And maybe you're explaining it to me with your graph or your chart, but when we say megawatt supply from Wyoming grew 8%,
That's from 1990 to 2021.
that's capacity.
That's the megawatt hours. Yes,
So that's the 39 to 43.
correct.
That 43 is the capacity to generate that 43. Doesn't mean that it produced that 43 or just capacity to produce that 43.
Of all of the installed, Mr. Chairman, of all of the installed electric generation capacity in Wyoming, the state produced 43.4 million megawatt hours of electricity.
Okay. Thank you.
And the total amount of electricity has declined in export percentages over time to 58%, according to EIA.
Okay, any
you.
questions? Further questions? Representative Henderson.
Real quick, Mr. Chairman, why, from your view, is a state like, Idaho, I think it's Idaho, the green line, why is it so much higher? Am I reading the right line?
Mr. Chairman?
Maybe looking at the wrong page.
Go ahead.
If you're looking at the second table, Wyoming is just below Utah. Utah has slightly more electric generation than Wyoming does. And above that is Idaho. And Idaho, most of their power comes from hydropower sources, but they have seen an increase in wind and solar production as well.
But they're above the median.
Idaho is right above Utah.
Yeah.
New Mexico is above the average.
Just what are they doing that we're not?
Mr. Chairman. Boy, that's probably a long answer, and I know you have limited time. So I think the competitive economics are very different. For wind, for example, there is not $1 per megawatt hour generation tax on wind. Many states in the West, and there's a full analysis of the totality of the taxes that's been performed by the University of Wyoming. Many states in the West have a property tax exemption, or like Montana, they have no sales taxes at all. So even if Wyoming has a low sales tax, it's still greater than zero. So there's a wind project that's built in Montana that is importing power into the Wyoming grid. In part, I surmise, because Montana has no sales tax and no generation tax, and also doesn't have an ISC process, which is pretty costly.
Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question just about tax fairness. We tax wind right now at $1 per megawatt hour. Solar is taxed at zero. Does that seem fair to you?
Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question. I think the issue of parity is very important. But all power plants, and I think it's critical to remember, we're talking about the product of electricity. The only type of electricity among coal, natural gas, hydro, geothermal, solar, wind, nuclear is wind. Adding another tax on solar doesn't make that situation any more equal.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. But wouldn't you say for electricity that gets produced by coal or by natural gas, that unlike wind, coal and natural gas, the inputs are taxed. So on coal, you have a 6.5% severance tax, then you've got about a 6% ad valorem tax on top of that. So you've got a 12% tax burden on the inputs to it, whereas obviously the air itself is not taxed for wind, right? And the same for similar for natural gas. So it seems like the heaviest tax burden falls upon the fossil fuels electricity generation because their inputs are taxed. The next heaviest burden is on wind, and solar is taxed at zero. I mean, to me, that it seems unfair, but do you think that's fair?
Mr. Chairman?
I'd just say yes or no.
I think this electricity topic with markets, customers, different customers' inputs is very complicated. It's not always easy to answer yes or no. all power plants in Wyoming pay the same taxes, property taxes and sales and use taxes. If you look at, for example, the Dry Fork Power Station located near Gillette, when they went through their ISC process in 2006, the only taxes that they talked about is what they will pay for Wyoming is property taxes and sales taxes associated with the plant. So in my view, it's really important to distinguish between what are the fuels for electricity production. The fuels for electricity production are largely going to other states. That's great. We want more of that, right? We want to have electricity of all kinds. The challenge is that when there's an additional cost of electricity to be produced in Wyoming for these resources, it risks pushing that business outside of the state borders because power plants can be built generally with wind and solar about anywhere. And if I may just say, the last slide is just meant to illustrate what are electric service territories in Wyoming. And the point is they don't stop at the Wyoming border. And also a tax that's applied on electricity in Wyoming of any kind is going to be disproportionately borne because some of these service territories get their electricity from outside the state. Some of them get it from inside of the state. Wyoming is a net exporter, but it doesn't mean it's not also importing electricity into Wyoming.
Okay, further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony and your handouts. Any other public comment? Mr. Jensen, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bob Jensen. I'm with Holland and Hart here in Cheyenne, and we represent the American Clean Power Association. American Clean Power Association represents companies in Wyoming that operate and build renewable power projects. We're opposed to House Bill 124. Wind and solar energy projects are an important part of our energy economy in Wyoming, our growing energy economy. And we have a unique portfolio that is, it has to continue to be able to grow. It has to be market relevant. And so these projects have to compete for capital investment with other states, and anything that we do that increases our or decreases our ability to be competitive with other states for these capital investments is a negative impact on our ability to grow our energy economy. As was mentioned before, we see continual evidence of this competitive issue with projects that go into other states for a variety of reasons. Among them, the taxation is one of the reasons why they go to other places. And it was mentioned the project that's just across the border in Utah, and there's another one just across the border in South Dakota. We think that an increase in taxation on any form of energy makes the sources more expensive to purchasers and makes our state less competitive to other states for these projects and for that capital investment. So in conclusion, we know that these projects are going to continue to be built. They're going to be built in places that are the most competitive for them to build in from a cost perspective. Stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Bob? Okay, appreciate your testimony. Any other testimony?
Moving quickly in the interest of time, Mr. Chairman, Tammy Johnson with Wyoming State AFL-CIO. I too would ask to not support this tax because these industries that we're competing to have in this state provide great jobs, good paying jobs, jobs for our trades workers that get out there in the field and do the building, do the construction. And so I would just ask you to think about that. We're desperate to get workers to work, and these are great jobs.
Okay, thank
Answer
you
any
for your
questions.
testimony. Any questions? Any other public comment? Come on up. If anyone else is going to have public comment, come on up and sit down. We want to roll these as quick as we can because we've got 3 more bills to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Chris Brown representing Powering Up Wyoming. We are a Wyoming grassroots organization that supports renewable energy alongside our legacy industries of coal, oil, and gas. And we too stand opposed to this bill. I think a key point that hasn't been mentioned yet, and with respect to the good speaker, When we talk about there's really no difference between wind and solar, Wyoming has a superior wind product. Wyoming does not have a superior solar product compared to some of our surrounding states with a much stronger natural resource. And so if we are to add this tax on, again, we hear a lot, well, solar pays nothing. Solar does pay sales and property tax. Tacking on an additional tax on top of those two that solar already does pay, from our perspective, will make the industry less competitive with states that have a superior natural resource and that incentivize solar development there. Final point, Mr. Chairman, when the wind tax, the generation tax, went live in 2012, I believe, there was about a decade chilling effect where investment was cooled before things ramped back up. And our concern is if this solar tax comes online, we'll see a similar cooling effect with investment going to other states that are competing for these projects. And so we stand opposed, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Okay, next, go ahead. I like your shirt.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, committee members, my name is George Hareska. I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about Bill 124. I am the Business Development Director for Oftedal Construction. For those of you that don't know who Oftedal is, we are a respected heavy civil contractor based out of Casper. We are 100% employee owned and operated, and we rely on construction projects to pay the bills along with paying the employee owners. I respectfully ask the committee to vote no against HBO 124. We need to welcome renewable energy companies with open arms rather than continuing to find ways to keep them out of our state. I've been working for Oftedal for almost 10 years, and it seems like clockwork that a bill like this comes up every single year. And people like me testify against it. Well, there are too many reasons to mention. Here are some of my main concerns and our main concerns. I'm traveling farther and farther outside of Wyoming borders looking for work. Less competitive projects don't get built. Renewable energy projects, including solar being built in the state, provide opportunities for local jobs and local contractors such as Oftedal. The state runs the risk of missing out on site development as taxes are increased. Local businesses, including construction companies, hotels, restaurants, entertainment establishments, machine shops, et cetera, and many other Wyoming businesses will miss out on tremendous revenue generating streams if solar farms decide not to build in Wyoming due to an increase in taxes. We need to help create well-paying jobs for the next generation of Wyomingites and to stay so that they stay and work here. My wife was born and raised in Wyoming. I have lived here for over 21 years. And we are raising two boys that are still in high school, one in Kelly Walsh and one in Natrona. We don't discriminate. We already started to hear the rumblings from them about what types of jobs are available here in Wyoming after college. And we are doing what we can to help put their minds at ease about what Wyoming holds in the future. I thank you for your time and encourage you to vote no to HB 124. Thank you.
So George, I was Oftedal's attorney for about 7 years back in the 90s. So good friends of mine.
Well, thank you.
But it's just interesting. The road construction folks are now supporting solar power. It's good stuff. All right. Next.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Mr. Chairman, my name is Ashley Harpstreet. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming Taxpayers Association. We are a 501c3 with a research arm and a 501c4 think tank. We're not pro-tax, we're not anti-tax, we're about sound tax policy. With this, we run all of our analysis on positions that goes through our 20-member board. We ask, is it justified? Is it equitable? Is it stable? Is it transparent? Based off that criteria, Mr. Chairman, we do oppose House Bill 124, electricity generation taxation. It is not justified as we feel it tries to modify behavior and discourages solar power development in the state. It is not equitable as only Wyoming wind power plants producing electricity are subject to an excise tax. No other electricity produced by other technologies are subject to an excise tax. Adding solar to an already unequal tax does not make it more equal. It is not stable as the tax only applies to solar and wind electricity. So it is not broad-based to limit volatility. An imposition of this tax will further the dilemma of Wyoming's reliance upon the minerals industry. Additionally, this does not lead to diversified revenues for Wyoming. Solar is already paying significant property and sales and use taxes. This policy decision encourages investment in neighboring states that have tax abatements and companies' preference on renewable energy. It is not transparent as this is a stealth tax. It's hidden from ratepayers as regulated electricity generators would pass it through to the ratepayers. Ratepayers will not see this tax in their bill and already pay a sales tax on the electricity they use. This would subject ratepayers to double taxation on the electricity without their knowledge. Thank you. I'll stand for questions.
Questions? Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Harpstreet, all I can say is that I'm just very surprised. The Taxpayers Association, which has, for as long as I can remember, been talking about how we need to tax people fairly across the board and not favor one industry over another. And if you had 3 bakers who were baking bread, and the first baker you taxed the ingredients, the second baker you didn't tax the ingredients, but you taxed them on a per loaf basis, and the third baker you didn't tax their ingredients and you didn't tax their per loaf on a per loaf basis either, I think your organization would call that unfair taxation against the first baker because he's getting taxed on the ingredients. The second baker is getting taxed on the loaf, and the third baker is not getting taxed on either. That's the case with solar right now. So I don't understand why you think that it's equitable to not have a similar tax on solar as on wind. I don't get it.
Mr. Chairman.
I don't think that was a question.
Okay.
Okay, any other?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, I would love to be out of this argument, but this is targeted to two categories within electricity generation. If you put electricity generation tax on everyone, I can't argue. But right now, there's only 2 feedstocks in this that would be included in this tax.
But we're not including, the wind's already there. So this is just an addition.
So it'd be wind and solar, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, next.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked the committee secretary to pass out this one pager that says why data centers what data centers mean to Wyoming. So I hope you have that all. The information that I'll share with you in my testimony is reflected on this document, so you'll have it as a takeaway. I am Betsy Hale. I'm the CEO of Cheyenne Leads. Leads, as we are referred to, is Cheyenne and Laramie County's private nonprofit economic development organization. I sincerely apologize that I did not contact each of you before this meeting. I am very intent on sharing factual data today on why House Bill 124 is bad for business, bad for future economic diversification in our state, and frankly, bad for Wyoming's decades-old reputation as a leader in the global energy economy and the #1 business-friendly tax state in the United States. Several of you on this committee have heard me testify on the significant economic impact that data centers and cloud computing companies have had in Wyoming since 2013. Please allow me to update you on those numbers, as there is a direct nexus between the investments made by technology companies and the fuels they use to drive our global economy. Since 2013, 4 of the 7 data centers in Laramie County contribute over $100 million to the Wyoming GDP annually. They've invested over $2.4 billion in capital, and we expect another $2 billion to be invested in the next 3 years. They have paid over $49 million in business and real property taxes. Sales taxes paid on power are more than $20 million, and their 280 plus jobs are more than $80,000 average annual wage. Leads is currently working with 7 data center prospects. When the 2 new Microsoft data center campuses are fully operational this year, these economic impact numbers that I just shared will only grow exponentially. Power and the price of it is often the #1 cost of operations for these businesses. It is the decision-making point by corporate site selectors and location decision makers. The attraction, retention, and expansion of data center operations in Wyoming is no easy task due to their large economic impact. There are 16 states which offer investment tax credits, 15 offer property tax abatements, 14 offer withholding tax credits, 31 states offer sales and use tax exemptions on the equipment. Anytime a tax is placed on power, the costs are passed along to the customer, and adding a tax to a company's largest expense at a time when inflation and rising costs of workforce and equipment hurts Wyoming's reputation as the #1 business tax-friendly state in the country. As this committee moves forward with this bill, I would ask for your no vote. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead.
So in a recent tour and visit with the power producers here with the utility here in Cheyenne, it was my understanding from their explanation that one of their customers, being a data center, pays a higher rate for the electricity to ensure that electricity is coming from alternative clean power. And so I'm struggling here just a little bit, okay? That this would be the demise if they're willing to pay that extra price for clean power now, how this was going to impact that a whole lot. If they're willing to do that, you would think that they would be willing to pay for clean power generated in Wyoming, even if it's going to have a little tax on it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I'm not sure I can speak on behalf of those companies. I just know what I've been asked to do as a economic developer that has many of those companies here, but I also want to be 100% transparent that starting in March, we'll have a construction of 150 megawatt solar field here in Cheyenne, south of town, that'll tie directly into a Black Hills Energy substation that'll be serving one, if not two data centers in the future. And over the 35-year lifespan of that site, 23 million in ad valorem taxes will be paid. And that doesn't include any other sales taxes besides this proposed tax, lodging tax, and other indirect taxes paid by the workers during construction. So I wouldn't want to leave here with you not knowing that there's a motivation.
I would have started with that argument. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and committee members.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Sounds like I'm the only one here on the other side of this equation. We are in support of this particular legislation, and the commissioners came down in their conversation around 2 points. One being a need for parity among energy producers in this state, and that includes between wind and solar energy production, and a desire to have this conversation before we see additional significant solar development in this state, so that we have a level playing field that is understood by all the parties at the start of development, rather than making changes midstream, because of course, the most important thing for business is to know the rules you're going to be playing by. So from that perspective, we're supportive. If I understand the process by which this would be implemented, the earliest we would see this tax actually applied to any of these developments would be January 1st of 2027, because of the 3-year delay that exists from development connection of the system to the tax. That's the existing approach for wind. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Questions for Jeremiah? Any other public comment? Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Brett Fanning. I'm the Excise Tax Administrator at the Wyoming Department of Revenue. And I'm one of the very few people in this room that is not for or against this particular bill. I'm just here to talk about kind of the administration portion of it. And so, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'd like to talk about kind of what this means for the department.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with this particular bill, right now, as it stands, there is no fiscal impact for the Department of Revenue. And what I mean by that is there was no appropriation if it was the legislature's intent to have this programmed into our normal excise tax system. And that's important because if there is no appropriation for this particular tax administration, that means we're doing this basically hard copy or manual via Excel. And so I just wanted the legislature to know that if this was part of tax administration or was passed by this body, that if the legislature did want it to go through our normal system, which we highly suggest, because then there's easier reporting functions, there's easier transparency when taxpayers reach out to us. It's just important for you to know that there would be a fiscal impact or an appropriation necessary if you wanted that to go through our normal excise tax system that our sales and use goes through and our tobacco tax goes through as well. So with that, the department will stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? So I think we just added a couple more positions in the Department of Revenue, at least if it comes out. But typically, the LSO should have contacted you and asked you for a fiscal impact that would be attached to this, and I don't see one, which is, and so if there is a particular one, if you can provide it to us.
Mr. Chairman, I certainly can do that. I did reach out to our IT contractor just to get some sort of basis about what this would cost if you wanted it to go through our normal system. You are correct, though. I was not contacted by LSO. Now, if it was a bill that came in later, I don't know the implications or how that all worked out. But once I did see this bill come out, I knew that there would likely be some IT program to the department.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, with the extension on the effective date to January 2024, would it not be an option for you to just ask for it in this budget session next year, and then you could know what the program will be and know what the exact dollar amount is, as opposed to us guessing today?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walter, I do have that fiscal impact, that note available from our IT contractor. And so that is a figure that I have right now. To your specific question, yes, it is something, but again, asking for additional dollars down the road, it is a request that we would certainly make because we would need it if you wanted it electronically administered. However, asking for dollars, you never know how that goes years into the
So
future.
what number do you have now? What is it?
Mr. Chairman, when I reached out to our IT contractor, it was $600,000 to have this as a one-time programming cost. And then the ongoing maintenance with that fiscal note, the ongoing maintenance with that program is included in our current IT contract.
Did you get a written quote or was that an over the phone quote?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do have that written quote right here, and I can provide that.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? Any other public comment? Close public comment. Motion on the bill. Moved by Representative Larson, second by Representative Walters. Discussion. Seeing none, roll call.
Representative Henderson, Representative Larson, Representative Sherwood,
No.
Representative Stith,
Aye.
Representative Walters, Representative Swanitzer,
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Speaker, you guys. Speaker wins. Aye. Okay, so it is 2:28. We have to be back in session at 2:30, I think, or 2:20. So we have why don't let's yeah, so we need to be there. So and we haven't noticed a meeting for tomorrow morning. I believe, but why don't we meet tomorrow morning at 9 and we'll take up Patrick and Dawn and tomorrow morning at 9. So can you put that back on the agenda as a carryover?
Which bill was that? House Bill 89?
89
Okay,
and 182. Yeah.
okay.